Well, it's 2 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and get started because we've got a room full here. So I think it's time to do that. I want to welcome everyone. This is the Herrin Area Historical Society. We do historical lectures. This is our 10th year of having lecture every month, and we've got some interesting ones coming up that I'll let you plug a little bit later. We have some board members here. If you're here, raise your hand and just wave. I don't see good anymore. There's a couple there, and they're up here. Well, I can see yours. I can trip over that one, but I can't see that. We have Cheryl back there, and Betsy over here, and Cindy over here. And Doris back here does the Facebook page. She didn't play anything. Yeah, and Gordon's going to be coming up here in about 6 seconds. Gordon, would you like to introduce our speaker to us now? And thank you everyone for coming out. Oh, and while you're getting ready, Susan is the head of the library, and she brought in a painting, and I learned a little bit about it, where it came from. Could you give us a real quick spiel while he's getting prepared?
So this was painted by my twin sister. She's an artist. She's also the executive director of the homeless shelter of Carr-Trigg. But she's very talented, and this comes from, it's in the book, and it's an area close to Camp Onasump, and it used to be a Boy Scout camp called Camp Acadus, and most people know it as Cedar Falls. So
And the twin sister was the new stuff to me.
As you may recall, 1879 was a very good year. Right, Cheryl?
Did you want to see me exit?
In New York City, Gilmore's Garden is renamed Madison Square Garden after James Madison. In Utica, New York, Frank Woolworth opens the first of many 5-cent and 10-cent stores. And at the age of 33, Thomas Edison tests the first practical electric light bulb, which lasts for 13 and a half hours. And in southern Illinois, Trigg and Hal Trevelyan are born. And it just seemed to be remarkable to me the similarities between the two men. And certainly Todd will elaborate on Trigg, and if you don't know Hal Trevelyan, it seems like if you drink the water in Herrin, you should know a little bit about Hal Trevelyan. He was a printer and publisher in Herrin. He came here in 1904, buying the existent newspaper at the time, and continued a notable and laudable career in printing and publishing through about the same period of time, through the late 40s, basically. I think the last book that he did with his private press was in the early 1960s. But he was a significant figure in the area, and figured prominently in the publication of Bloody Williamson. He was a sort of secret contributor to the book, but he refrained from being credited by Paul Engle for fear of retribution. But they both Trigg and Trevelyan have humble beginnings in southern Illinois. Trigg was born in Ozark, as I'm sure Todd will tell you. Trevelyan was born in Norris City, which is over by Carmi. They both had a love of the printed word from a very early age. They both had an interest in history. They both promoted the area in their publications and their actions. They were both staunch Republicans. Trigg had his Franklin House, named for FDR, which was his outhouse.
You're stealing my thunder here.
Oh, sorry. You can repeat it, sorry. And Trevelyan was actually a Illinois Secretary of State candidate in the early 1930s. And both were altruistic businessmen whose presence in the area certainly bettered it. And moving on to Todd, our guest for the day, he is a director and administrator at the hospital in Hardin County. He's an alumnus of SIU and lives in Elizabethtown with his wife and 3 daughters. So without further ado, Todd Carr.
So, what I'm going to talk about today is Mr. Trigg, that has been alluded to already, L.O. Trigg. He was a newspaper publisher in El Dorado. He started the El Dorado Daily Journal back in the early 1900s. And he was instrumental in getting the Shawnee National Forest here. And so, over the course of the talk, we're going to talk about Mr. Trigg, but what we're mainly going to talk about was Trigg's Ozark tours that he held between 1931 and 1949. The Trigg tours continued through the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. They did an annual Trigg tour, and they stopped in the 70s, and then a group of us tourism folks in Hardin, Saline, and Gallatin County, along with the Shawnee National Forest, brought the Trigg tours back in 2013. And so we've been doing a spring and fall tour, one-day tour each year since 2013. There was one in 13 and one in 2014, but since 2015 they've been twice a year. So here is Lindolf Oscar Trigg, born in 1879, and he died in 1949. He died, they had a tour that summer, and then he died that fall in November of that year. And over on the right-hand side, that's the house that he grew up in Ozark. So he was born in Ozark, and he grew up in that house, and that's him and his mother and his father. He also had a brother, and he had an infant sister that passed away. This is the smokehouse of that house on the left, and when Trigg was born and grew up in this house, he must have had the newspaper publishing business in his blood. Because when he was just a young boy, he built his own printing press using the parts out of a flour mill and a marble slab, and started producing his own printed material. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a lot of fruit that was shipped out of that area, much like around the Cobden area today. But over in Ozark, there was a lot of fruit sent out of that area too, and he printed a lot of flyers and a lot of marketing material for the fruit growers over there. And on the right-hand side up here is a newspaper that he put together for his school, and that was published in 1900. That's the January 26th, 1900 edition of the Sullen School News that Mr. Trigg put together on that homemade printing press that he had in his parents' smokehouse. And this is the smokehouse right here, and him standing next to it as an adult. So that was his first newspaper that he did. He ended up working at Vienna in a press there. He's worked in a newspaper in Carrier Mills. He started a newspaper in Thompsonville, and then he decided to move his newspaper from Thompsonville to El Dorado because he thought that Saline County was going to move the county seat from Harrisburg to El Dorado, and he got word of that and decided he wanted to be in El Dorado so that when that happened, he would be in a good position to be the paper for the county seat. Well, the county seat never did move, but he did start the El Dorado Journal, and then it became a daily journal, I think, in the 1920s. But that's Mr. Trigg with his smokehouse. Here he is at the printing press getting the galleys together to print the paper the way they used to do it, all by hand. Here's some galleys down there that are ready to go to the press, and they're putting new ones together to go in there. It was a very laborious process to produce a paper back then. This is Southern Illinois in the 1930s. This is actually a road in Polk County. It's a gravel road today out in the country, but this is what it looked like back then. And see the trees and see the erosion and what it looked like. Here's another picture. This is old mine subsidence in the 1930s. And so in the 1930s, what caused Southern Illinois to be like this is throughout the 1800s, when the frontiers were coming into Southern Illinois, they were coming into Illinois from, especially Southern Illinois, mainly from Georgia and Tennessee and the Carolinas. And what brought them to Illinois is the land that they had been farming in the Carolinas and Tennessee and those places were getting to where they wouldn't grow crops anymore. And They didn't know such things as crop rotation and fertilizing the soil like we do today. And so they would just farm land back in the 1700s until it was just powder. You know, they had taken all the life out of the soil. And when they came to southern Illinois, they did the same thing. And in southern Illinois, something that was different than the land that they were coming from, most of our soil, or most of our land here in southern Illinois, the glaciers never got down here, and we don't have the flatland prairie that's north of here. You know, we have all these hills in southern Illinois. Just south of here, you start hitting hills, and because the glaciers never reached there and never flattened it down and never produced the prairie that you see to the north of here. And so a lot of these areas in southern Illinois that they cut the timber off of and started farming, the timber should have never been cut off the land because the timber was holding the soil on the hillsides. And throughout the 1700s and 1800s, we had mining going on. They cut the timbers down for coal mining. They cut the timbers down for the railroads that came through southern Illinois. They cut the timber down for their houses and their the buildings and towns that were built up. And they cut the timber down for agriculture, to clear the fields for agriculture. And so all of this together, after the losing my train of thought. After the stock market crash, and people just couldn't make a living, when the Depression hit, people started leaving southern Illinois in droves and going to where they could find work, and they were just leaving the spent land behind to just grow up and for the land and the dirt to just wash away into the streams and into the creeks, which eventually led to the rivers. And so one of the reasons we had such catastrophic floods at the turn of the last century and into the early 1900s, culminating with the 1937 flood, is what most of us in deep southern Illinois remember as the worst flood, was because so much soil and dirt had gotten into the river system and was silting up the rivers to where they couldn't flow, the rain couldn't wash off and run on down the rivers like it should. So this is the landscape of the 1930s when the Shawnee National Forest was created. And in 1930, the Chicago Tribune wrote an article, an editorial piece, and said the federal government needs to put a national forest in southern Illinois, or in Illinois, and if it's going to be in Illinois, it needs to be in southern Illinois. Now, we'd like to think the Chicago Tribune was doing this because they were very conservation-minded. No, they were wanting to have a good source of wood pulp for their newspapers here in Illinois, and they thought if there's national forests that are being designated throughout the country, let's get one in Illinois so that we'll have a good source of wood pulp. So they wrote the editorial in 1930. The commission, it was called the National Forest Reservation Commission in Washington, D.C., was the group that decided where national forests were to be put. And so they sent an initial man out at the end of 1930, into 1931, to survey southern Illinois, do a general survey, and see, A, is there enough land here that we can have a national forest, and is the land available? You know, is there enough land and is it available? Well, the man came in the early 1931, he surveyed the area, did a general survey, looked at the wasteland, like you're seeing in these pictures here, and he said, southern Illinois is ripe for a national forest. The hillsides are washing away, there's erosion everywhere, there's no trees left. I mean, there was very little forests left in southern Illinois at the time. And so he finished his report and turned it in March 1931 and said, I recommend that the Forest Commission put a national forest in southern Illinois. So that's March 1931. The first man that came on the forest for the Forest Service was this man right here, a man by the name of Mr. Worthen, and this is one of the last of the old growth forests in southern Illinois. This is called Kaskaskia Woods, and it still exists today. The Shawnee National Forest bought the land and made it an experimental station, and this old growth is still around today. But that's Mr. Worthen, the first man on the Shawnee National Forest that came. This is from 1933. And that's one of the Ozark tours visiting Kaskaskia Woods later on in the later 1930s. This is the Daughters of the American Revolution. one of the things that they used to get the Shawnee National Forest up and going was women's groups. And women's federation groups would help sponsor a Trigg talk, where a Trigg would go and talk to them about what was going on in conservation and the need for the Shawnee National Forest. Well, the DARs got involved, and in the 1930s, the DAR was celebrating their 100th anniversary, and they were putting what was called penny pines. And for 1,000, they would plant 1,000 acres of pine trees, and the pine trees were a penny a pine, and it was a national promotion, and the DAR was putting one of these forests in every state as part of their 100th anniversary. And in southern Illinois, they picked southern Illinois, and they put their penny pine forest over by Pounds Hollow, over in Gallatin County. And this marker in rock still exists today, and it's on the side of the road on Carver's Ridge Road there that connects Garden of the Gods, Rimrock, and Pounds Hollow. You'll find this on the side of the road there. But this is the dedication ceremony from the 1930s. And here it is today. So look at the difference. Look in the back. From 1930s to 2017, I think is when this picture was taken. Here is some of the promotional material that Mr. Trigg made. Again, he was a newspaper man. He had his own printing press, so he was able to publish all kinds of promotional material promoting the need for the Shawnee National Forest. Up on the right-hand top is a business card announcing the 10th annual Ozark Tour from July 22nd through the 24th, 1940. Down in this corner is a little sermon on the Ozark Tours. It's kind of cute. I'll read it to you. It says, "Happiness is largely just a state of mind. Many a poor man is happy, many a rich man is miserable. To be happy, defy your troubles or cares by going on an Ozark tour. Troubles or cares simply can't follow you on these tours. The scenery and fellowship licks them every time. As a general gloom chaser and promoter of true happiness, an Ozark tour has the world beaten. An Ozark tour is in fact a short vacation from daily life that inspires, refreshes, rebuilds, and revitalizes you. Annual tours are necessities, just like medicine, food, clothing, and shelter. They satisfy the human need for fellowship, inspiration, and enjoyment as no entertainment in history has ever satisfied it. To promote your own good health and happiness, plan for periodic, systematic relaxation, and go on an Ozark tour regularly." And then it says, "For Ozark information, write L.O. Trigg, El Dorado, Illinois." Also, he put out a newspaper every year starting in 1934 called the Ozark News, and it was full of conservation material, what was going on in the National Forest, what was going on in southern Illinois, and he would send this out to all the people that were interested in conservation throughout the 1930s and 1940s. And this is an issue of that newspaper. There's also an actual one in this shadow box over here. It might be the same. It is. It's the same issue. And this is all promotional material that Mr. Trigg made over the years, and you can come and take a look at it when the talk's over. That's actual stuff that he had done. And here's some more promotional material. See them, know them, enjoy them. They're yours, the Illinois Ozarks. Now, geologists will tell you that the Illinois Ozarks actually stop at the Mississippi River. That chain of hills from Fountain Bluff down to the Pine Hills in Union County, that is all part of the Ozark Range, just like in Missouri and Arkansas. And that, from a geological standpoint, that is the end of the Ozark Range, and the rest of southern Illinois they classify as the Shawnee Hills. But back in Trigg's day, they didn't care what the geologists said. The uplift of hills that starts at Fountain Bluff and goes over to Gold Hill in Gallatin County, that marks the end of where the glaciers hit, everything from there south, back in the 1930s, they considered the Illinois Ozarks. And so all of these hills that we enjoy in southern Illinois was all part of something they called the Illinois Ozarks. So even though geologically speaking, it ends at the Mississippi River, culturally speaking, southern Illinois is much like southern Missouri and much like Arkansas, and we share a lot of similarities culturally. So we're all part of the Ozarks as far as Mr. Trigg was concerned. And up on the upper right is Mr. Trigg's business card. It says, L.O. Trigg, salesman for the Illinois Ozarks. And then the fine print in the corner says, but not in the real estate business. Because he was selling you on the Illinois Ozarks. He was selling this as a place for tourists to come and visit. He was selling it on the need for conservation. But he wasn't trying to sell any land. He was just trying to sell you on coming and visiting. Okay, so 1930, the Chicago Tribune does the editorial. The National Forest Commission sends the man out. He does his initial general survey of southern Illinois. He completes his report. He recommends to the National Forest Commission in March of 1931 that they put a national forest in southern Illinois. The National Forest Commission takes his recommendation and they deny it. They said, nah, we're not going to put a national forest in southern Illinois. So that summer, the Kiwanis Club at Harrisburg decides we need to make sure that this national forest happens. And so a group of men from Hardin, Pope, Gallatin, and Saline counties, all under the Kiwanis Club of Harrisburg, form a committee called the Illinois Ozarks group. And the Illinois Ozarks Committee of the Kiwanis Club decided that they were going to start promoting the need for the national forest and get some petitions signed and some resolutions made by the governing bodies in southern Illinois and send it to Washington, D.C. to make sure this national forest happened. Remember, the National Forest Commission had just denied Illinois' request for a national forest. So this group of men, it was a 9-member committee from those 4 counties, started promoting the need for the national forest. And Mr. Trigg, being a newspaper man with his promotional material, but he was also a photographer, doing photos for the paper, he put a slideshow together, and any community group that would allow him to come, he did a slideshow presentation of the wonders of southern Illinois. And so a women's group, a chamber of commerce, a Kiwanis Club, any of these type groups that existed in southern Illinois, he got on their agenda and went and gave his slideshow presentation. And every place he went, he asked for petitions to be signed to get a national forest in southern Illinois. They went to the governing bodies of the counties and the municipalities and asked them to pass resolutions stating that we wanted a national forest in southern Illinois. So all of this work started in 1931 after the National Forest Commission denied Illinois' request. One of the big things that he used as a promotional vehicle was to create the Ozark Tours. Starting in July of 1931, each summer he would take a group of influential men. It was always men. There was only one woman that ever went on an Ozark tour. But most all of them were men. They were lawyers, they were businessmen, even statesmen. A governor had been on an Ozark tour. Paul Powell from Vienna, who was a bigwig at the time, he was involved in the Ozark tours. He was a friend of Mr. Trigg's. He went on Ozark tours. And even our legislators in Washington came and participated in these Ozark tours. And so this is the very first tour in 1931. This is Mr. Trigg right here in the coat and tie and shirt, getting ready to go out on a 3-day camping trip in the Shawnee, what's today the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois. He always went out fully dressed like that in shirt and tie. So this is when they left, and this is what he looked like when they came back after 3 days of camping out in the woods. And so this is them getting ready to start. It says, the explorers ready to start, July 27th, 1931. So this is the first Ozark tour. I lost my advancer. There we go. All right, here is the view from Fountain Bluff over on the other side of Murfreesboro. This is the old forest fire search tower that was on top of Fountain Bluff. And this is the view, that's the Mississippi River, and you're looking across the Mississippi River over towards Missouri. So that's one of the places they went. And the rest of this slideshow is basically going to be pictures that were taken on these Ozark tours in the 1930s and 40s from all over southern Illinois. And I'll just point out the locations as we go. So this is Fountain Bluff. This is Mr. Trigg sitting on Stoneface over in Saline County, over south of Harrisburg, on the left. On the right-hand side, this is them visiting the digs at Kincaid Mounds down at Brookport. The University of Chicago was doing archaeological digs at the mounds at Kincaid, and it's said that modern archaeology concepts were invented at these dig sites at Kincaid Mounds. And these digs happened to be going on in the mid-30s, and I think might be from 1934 or 35 that they visited the Kincaid Mounds, and that's what's going on the picture on the right. Up on the left, you said you were going to have Mark Wagner come and talk about Indian rock art. This is some Indian rock art that is in southern Illinois. This is called Footprint Rocks. This is on the Johnson and Massac County line. It's on private property. It's not in the Shawnee National Forest. And I've been there. It looks just like this today, but it is harder to see. Someone back then had taken shoe polish or something and filled in all the little footprints to where they really popped out. Well, all of that's all worn away today, and the light has to be just right on that rock face for you to see it. But that's on the Johnson and Massac County line. On the right-hand side is an Indian stone grave, and this was near Rattlesnake Ferry. Rattlesnake Ferry was in Jackson County, south of Murfreesboro. But that's what an Indian stone grave looked like. The four walls of the grave were lined with flat stones, and then those two flat stones that you see off to the side would have been set on top of them. This is the remains of the original Illinois iron furnace that's down outside of Elizabethtown. This is what it looked like when they visited in 1931. It was built in the 1830s. Southern Illinois and the furnace sites in Hardin County were the only place in Illinois that iron was ever produced. And they produced it in this furnace. And here's what it looks like today. In 1969, the Shawnee National Forest had it rebuilt, and this is the rebuilt furnace as it looks today with the kiosk in front of it. So there it is, the original one, and here's what it looks like today. Here is one of the fluorspar mines in southern Illinois. The second night of the first Ozark tour, they actually spent the night out on the rock piles at this fluorspar mine. And this was a fluorspar operation that was done by a British company. And you can see the entrance to the mine over there on the right-hand side. Here's the cave at Cave and Rock. Everybody that gets a picture of the cave usually goes inside and does a silhouette picture like this. So that's what you see on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, you can see the entrance to the cave from the river. And the river is quite a bit further away back in the 1930s than it is today, because the Smithland Dam created the Smithland Pool, and the river is a lot closer to the cave now than it used to be, because the river levels are higher. But you can see how much further away it is. If you've ever visited the cave, the river's quite a bit closer to the cave today than it used to be. And here's some more pictures from the cave. This is a WPA. They actually camped inside the cave, and that's the Ozark tour up on top camping. This is from around 1935. One of the WPA projects, as part of the New Deal, one of the WPA projects was to clean the silt from the back of the cave out of it. And I actually knew a man that worked on that project. They used a mining cart and a mule, and they took dynamite, and they put dynamite in the soil and the silt in the back of the cave, busted it up to loosen the silt, and they'd put it in that mining cart, and then the mule would take it out to the front of the cave. And so right here you can see the rail that the mining cart was on, running right through there. And then here you can see the little derrick at the end of the cave where they were dumping the dirt out that they were getting from the cave. So today, there's not this big pile of dirt in front of the cave. It's all washed away again. But while this was going on, they got quite a big pile of dirt sitting out in front of the cave that they were trying to find the source of the water source that had caused the cave, because they thought if they dug down far enough back there, they would find the creek or the stream that formed the cave. They never did. The thinking is the cave was formed by a stream that some earthquake over time has rerouted that stream, and it no longer flows through the cave. Because unless it rains and water is dripping through the ceiling of the cave, it's a dry cave today, but it's obvious from the smooth walls that it was formed by water running through it. So again, that's from the mid-1930s. Here's another picture from inside of the cave in rock, and again, you can see the rails going to the back of the cave where that mining cart was being used to empty it out. Another picture from cave. This is the cemetery down at Mounds City Cemetery. And up on the right, that's the old Marine Works when the Navy had a shipyard at Mounds during the Civil War. That's the remains of that Marine ways that used to be down at Mounds, over on the right-hand side. Here's the old slave house in Gallatin County. When the Trigg tour visited it, they visited in the 30s when they had just opened the slave house for a tourist site. I'm sure most everyone has heard about the notorious third story where the slaves were kept and where they were whipped and all that. Archaeologists and historians believe today that most of that was just made up in the 30s to get people to come and visit the tourist attraction. Probably what was going on that third story, Mr. Crenshaw, who built the house in the 1830s, he had a lot of business going. The salt works attracted a ton of business to the area, and they think most of those rooms up there were actually lodging rooms where they were putting people up overnight up in those rooms up there rather than holding slaves. So anyway, it made for a good story and brought tourists to the area for many, many years. This is the grave of General Posey. General Posey was the aide-de-camp to General Washington during the Revolutionary War. He's also to be the rumored illegitimate son of George Washington, and he is buried in Gallatin County. He was, back in when this was the Northwest Territory, he was a territorial governor of, I believe, Indiana, and he had a lot of posts in this area, post-Revolutionary wartime, and his daughter and son-in-law lived just outside of Shawneetown, because remember, Shawneetown, when Illinois became a state, was the place in Illinois. It's where the land office was. It's where the first bank was. So Shawneetown was a hopping place in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And so when he came to visit his daughter and son-in-law in Shawneetown, he on the journey here he got sick, and he ended up dying at their house. And so they buried him in the rose garden of their house. And this was his grave, his little mausoleum. And Westwood Cemetery today grew up around his grave in that rose garden. And so today it's Westwood Cemetery. The house is long gone, but his was the first grave in that cemetery, and that's it. Over on the right-hand side is the old Illinois Bank in Shawneetown. And the Historical Society over in Gallatin County now has access to, twice a year, they open it up on the weekends, and you can actually tour the old bank, and you can go all the way up to the third story and visit it. It's really run down because nothing's been done with it over the years, but it's a pretty neat building nonetheless. So if you haven't had a chance, when they open that up, watch the Facebook page for the Gallatin County Historical Society, and they do dates in the spring and the fall, and you can go over and you can actually tour that one. And the original First Bank of Illinois, which is the John Marshall House, it's open every Sunday through they close it in the winter, but every Sunday through the year it's open as well, and you can tour it. Here is a cemetery just south of Cedar Bluff, west of Fern Cliff State Park. And this row of stones right here were all placed during the Depression, and they all say, "In God I Trust." Nobody is buried under these. They were called the phantom graves because no one was buried under them. And there was a row of 35 stones. And if you go to the cemetery today, it's just up from Cedar Bluff Church. Like I said, west of Fern Cliff. It's off of Happy Hollow Road. And if you go there today, there's only 5 of these left. They've taken these stones up and actually buried people, where some of these stones were. But this is the Ozark tour visiting the place. I think this is from the 1940s, though. And this old cemetery, and nobody knows why these stones were put there. But it's a row of 35 stones that all said, "In God I Trust." There is a rumor, and I haven't seen it anywhere else, that you were considered going to heaven if you were buried on one side of these stones, and if you're buried on the other side, it was another story. All right, this is Anvil Rock. This is in the Garden of the Gods Wilderness. If you go to the observation trail, you won't see this rock, like where Camel Rock is. If you take the observation trail, you won't see it. But on the parking lot, there's a trail that goes off the parking lot that goes out into the wilderness area. And if you take that, you'll walk right past it. And in Trigg's day, it wasn't called Garden of the Gods. Actually, you had to know somebody to even get you there, because Garden of the Gods was a fairly little-known site, and only locals knew about it out there, knew about the rocks and the formations out there. And Anvil Rock is what Trigg called it, the Anvil Rock area, because in a gazetter that Peck did in 1834, I believe, a guy by the name of Peck wrote a description of a key site in every county of the state. And one of the things that he mentioned in that gazetter was this Anvil Rock. And so Trigg always called it the Anvil Rock area. It wasn't until the 1940s that they started calling it Little Garden of the Gods, and it wasn't until the 1960s that the Shawnee National Forest even developed a road and trail system there. It was Garden of the Gods, today is one of the more popular sites in the Shawnee National Forest. It was actually one of the last ones developed. It wasn't developed until the 1960s. And here's Garden of the Gods, them out there visiting the rock formations. Another picture at Garden of the Gods. And then you can see them all on these rocks here. If you've ever been on the observation trail at Garden of the Gods, you know the wooden boardwalk that you walk on? That wooden boardwalk is right here. So that's where you're looking at. These are all from the 1930s. This is from 1938. Or 1948, excuse me. This is Mr. Trigg and his wife, Inez. And this is at their Rest Haven farm. They had a farmhouse and some land on the Gallatin County, Hardin County line near High Knob. And this is at their farmhouse. And this was 3 days after the 1948 Ozark tour. And he was sitting there resting and took a picture at the end of the trail, Rest Haven. He liked to spend time out at Rest Haven Farm. His granddaughter, who I interviewed for the book that I wrote, she said that she loved going out to Rest Haven Farm with her granddad and playing in the creeks out there. All right. Someone's already stolen my thunder on the Franklin house. Mr. Trigg was a lifelong Republican. He ran for the state legislature as a Republican. He didn't win, but he ran as a state rep. And as a lifelong Republican, he did not care for FDR at all. And so at the outhouse that he had out at Rest Haven, he named the Franklin House. And you'll see, this is the outhouse at Rest Haven, and the sign up above the door says Franklin House. The ironic thing about it is FDR is the one who signed the proclamation that made the Shawnee National Forest a designated national forest in September of 1839. So even though he didn't like FDR's policies, it was FDR that actually signed the proclamation creating the Shawnee National Forest. The picture at the bottom is a picture of something called the short grave, which is an interesting story. It's in the book, and I'll come back to it if we have time. Up on the upper right-hand upper right-hand corner, I should say, is a spring called the Coulter Spring that was in Grindstaff Hollow out at Rest Haven Farm. And anytime he ever brought an Ozark tour out at Rest Haven, one of the rites of passage of the Ozark tour was to go down and do a foot washing in that spring each summer. And so that's them having their foot washing at the spring. The man on his back up front with his feet in the air, that's Dr. Farrell of Farrell Hospital at El Dorado. Here they are on a riverboat cruise. They're on the mailboat Catherine. And this is one of the packet boats that went up and down the Ohio River in the early 1900s. And I think this is from 1933. Here is the view of the riverfront at Elizabethtown. Has anybody been to the floating restaurant in Elizabethtown, the Elizabethtown River Restaurant? Well, this ferry, this is the old E-Town ferry, and it's sitting at the location where the river restaurant is today. So off in the distance, you can see Rosiclare, and then this is what we call Jack's Point, and there was a quarry there, and you can see a rock quarry, the remains of that rock quarry, but that's what you're looking at there. And that's the Catherine moored next to the ferry boat. So the Catherine that we just saw, the old packet boat, is moored next to that ferry boat. And then across the river would be Hurricane Island, but locals call it Herrin. Here they all are around the summer house in the Rose Hotel front lawn, the gazebo that's on the bluff overlooking the river. This is them in the gazebo at the Rose Hotel. And here's the Rose Hotel from the river. And you can see today the river goes right up to the base of the bluff. There's not any space below the bluff where you can go walking or anything like you see in this picture. So again, the Smithland Pool raised the river level up to where the river is a lot higher today than it was back then. The river goes all the way to the bluff today. But back in the 1830s, you could walk down there. And this is in Elizabethtown. Here's from 1938. They took a barge and did their Ozark tour by barge. They got on at Shawnee Town and they traveled, this is them stopping off in Elizabethtown, but they went from Shawnee Town all the way to Metropolis by barge. And the bottom picture is the confluence of the Saline River and the Ohio River. And so when you're looking at this picture, the trees on the left side of the picture is Hardin County. The trees in the middle of the picture is Gallatin County, and the trees on the right-hand side of the picture is Kentucky. So that's where the Saline River and the Ohio River join together. How many knew that there was a liberal arts college in Hardin County once upon a time? Anybody knew that?
What town in Hardin County?
It wasn't in town, it was out on Carr-Trigg Road, not too far from Garden of the Gods, if you know where Garden of the Gods was. Where you turn off of Route 34 on the Carr-Trigg Road, that corner right there, that's where it was located. A group of students from Chicago got together in the 30s and decided they were going to come and educate the hillbillies in southern Illinois. And so they came and created a college that they called College in the Hills. And this is a picture from College in the Hills. And part of your tuition when you went to college there was to help build the campus because they were living in tents. And so you can see some of the tents over here to the side, and there is a building right there. I don't think that there was ever more than 3 buildings built there. The college made it for 3 years in the 1930s. And has anyone ever heard of Penny Cent? This is Penny Cent right there. He was a German art instructor. And again, these students came down from Chicago, so they were probably a lot more liberally minded than the rural people of Hardin and Pope County, because this is right on the Hardin-Pope and the Saline County line. And Penny Cent was one of those characters that came down that everybody kind of looked sideways at because he had a German accent. He was an artist. He didn't wear much clothes, so he was rather a unique fellow. And there's a lot that could be said about him, and I'll just leave it at that. But he was one of the instructors at this liberal arts college. And that's him in the middle. If you've ever heard of him, that's him. This is the impoundment at Pounds Hollow. This is actually, if you go on the Rimrock Trail and you go to the back of the Rimrock Trail and walk down the steps to the Oxlot Cave, that's what we're looking at here. And this is where Pounds Hollow, that's where it gets its name, from this impoundment. And when the early settlers came, here, this area looked like an area where out east that they would, shelter bluffs, they would put a corral on one side of the shelter bluff and then use the back side of the shelter bluff as a covering for livestock. And they called them impoundments out east. And when the settlers came here and saw this, they said it looked just like an impoundment, and that's where the Oxalot Cave gets its name, or Pounds Hollow, from that impoundment. And you can see how high the bluffs are, because here's all the people down here, and we're not even seeing the top of the bluff. And this is, if you want to visit this site, it's on the Rimrock Trail today. All right, this is the first meal on the first Ozark tour. They drove the trucks down into Bell Smith Springs, down into the creek, and they are sitting in the creek at Bell Smith Springs, all eating off their flatbed truck. I failed to mention earlier, all of the Ozark tours were done by on the backs of trucks, and the first 2 or 3 were all done in trucks without any side rails on them. So as they went on these trips, they were just sitting on the back of a truck with their feet dangling off. And so this truck that we're seeing here is the actual truck that they were traveling on all these old roads in southern Illinois, just hanging on for dear life. And so this is the first group eating that first meal at Bell Smith Springs. I meant to do this from the beginning. I'll do it now. I have some of the photos in laminated that I'm going to pass around, and you can take a look at them and get a closer look. This is Mr. Trigg himself. Get that started around the room. Here's that picture that I showed from Garden of the Gods earlier. Here's a picture of another one of the meals. They were eating at a church and had the church ladies provide the meal for them, and they're all lined up eating their lunch. Here's the 1934 Ozark tour, and you can see in 1934 they started using trucks with sides on them, which was a little bit safer than running around with your feet dangling off, but they still were traveling by truck, and there was so many men that went that year they had 2 trucks to haul them all around. They had as many as 3 trucks at one time.
There were women on that group, or is that just because they fixed the dinner?
Just because they fixed the dinner. Ann West was the only woman that ever went on an Ozark trip. She went on the 1937 Ozark tour as a reporter. She rode in the car, because they always had a car that went along with the trucks that would be like an Herrin vehicle. She had to ride in the car, and she had to make her own sleeping arrangements because she wasn't allowed to sleep, where the men were. She had to find other sleeping arrangements. Everybody know who Ann West is? Ann West was a reporter, a newspaper reporter, a columnist, a freelancer, and she ended up marrying a man, I think a dentist in Marion. He was some kind of physician, and she donated a lot of money that went to the Carterville Library. The Carterville Library has a whole section named after her, or a collection.
The library.
Okay, well, the whole library is named after her. So you guys might know more about her than I do. But Ann West went in the 1937 Ozark tour, and she wrote columns and was, like I said, a columnist. And then this last picture, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is the Ozark tour fishing off the dam at Golconda. They took a boat out and just sat on the dam, and they were fishing off of the old dam at Golconda. The dam's not there anymore. But can you imagine the Army Corps of Engineers letting something like this go on today? Just sitting on a dam out there fishing? Okay, let's continue on. Here's another one of those meals. The top is a church. This is the meal that they went to after they got through at the Kincaid Mounds. This is somewhere around New Liberty or Hamletsburg, down in deep Polk County. The bottom picture is they are eating at Crab Orchard Lake. And so the reason why it's all washed out in the back, this old picture, is because that's the lake back there. And it didn't show up in the picture. That's why it's all white back there. But that's Crab Orchard Lake. This is from the 1940s. Crab Orchard Lake didn't exist in the 30s. There's the picture of them fishing off the dam up on the top. In the bottom, when the CCC came to southern Illinois in the 30s, Trigg would arrange for some of the meals to be done at the CCC camps. And this is one of the CCC camps. This is Camp Pomona, which is over by Pomona, the town of Pomona, Pomona Natural Bridge, south of Murfreesboro. And this was an African-American camp. It's the only African-American CCC camp that was in southern Illinois during the CCC era. And Trigg and the Ozark tourists stopped and ate there. All right, this is anybody know where Camp Cadiz is in Hardin County? All right, this is Johnson's store, which was just down the road from Camp Cadiz. And this is Mr. and Mrs. Johnson with Mr. Trigg over here. Mr. Johnson was a Victrola repairman, and he ran this store that you see up on the top there. And Mr. Johnson was blind, couldn't see. And so Mr. Johnson, when his boxes that he was selling in the store, his wares came in, his goods, he would take his thumbnail and he would notch the cardboard that the packaging that the things came in, he would notch it with his fingernail, and that's what he knew, how he knew what to charge everybody when they would bring stuff up to the counter and to check them out. But he was blind, and since the book came out and since I started doing these talks, I've actually talked to a lady that was related to them, and she said not only that, but behind the store, to get their water, they used a spring that was on the back side of the store down at the bottom of the hill. And he had a rope from the back side of the store down to the spring at the bottom of the hill where he would go fetch water down at that spring, and then he could use the rope to get himself back up to the store building. So that's Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, and this was right down from Camp Cadiz. This was at Pomona, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, the 6 people on the bottom of the picture and the husband all lived in this cabin in the 1930s. This is the cabin that they were living in. And if you've ever been to Pomona Natural Bridge, when you go through the town of Pomona, and then you go up and over a hill and down to the parking area for the Natural Bridge, this cabin sat up on top of that hill before you go down to where the Natural Bridge is. But this was their house that they lived in, and this is from the 1930s as well. This is a farm in Johnson County, Union County, sorry, somewhere around Jonesboro, or Dongola. I'm getting my facts mixed up. And these are pieces of coral that came off of this man's farm. And the whole point of the stop and the point of seeing the coral was to realize when the glaciers were coming down from the north and the glaciers stopped just north of here, the Gulf of Mexico at one time came all the way north to southern Illinois, and the southern tip of Illinois is actually coastal plain, the remains of coastal plain, because the ocean at one time reached all the way up to the tip of Illinois, and the coral that's here in southern Illinois is a sign that the ocean at one time reached all the way up to southern Illinois. So the area that we're living in is really rather unique because there's the band of these hills that we live in just south of here, and then south of those hills is old coastal plain from the Gulf Coast, and then just north of here, actually the area we're standing in right now, the plains start and go all the way north from the glaciation. So this is them looking at some coral deposits at this farm in Union County. Here is the old custodian's house at Horseshoe Lake down by Cairo. And here's a couple of natural bridges. These are both on the east and the west side of Cyprus. The natural bridge at the top doesn't exist anymore. It fell in the 1960s, but this is before the bridge fell. There's a church on the east side of Cyprus, and this is back behind that church. And then the one on the right-hand side, or lower right, that is Rainbow Bridge, and that's on a man's farm down in Cyprus on the west side of town. And we actually took our Ozark tour there 2 years ago, and we went out on the bridge just like they did on the Ozark tour and took a picture on it. But this is in a man's field. He's got cattle out there. And if you're real nice to him, he'll let you go out there and take a look at it. Up on the top, remember I said that Trigg went and talked to all these businessmen's group, women's group? Well, this is a meeting of a 4-county Kiwanis Club on the lawn of the Johnson County Courthouse there in Vienna. And they were having a 4-county Kiwanis Club meeting, and the Ozark tourists stopped and visited and talked about their promotional work and joined them for their meal at that Kiwanis meeting. And then the lower right is Tunnel Hill. Back when Tunnel Hill was still a railroad, you can see the railroad, the rails still going through the tunnel, but that's now the bike trail down at Tunnel Hill. This is Cedar Bluff School. I was mentioning the cemetery where the Thanem graves were earlier, and there's Cedar Bluff Church still exists down at the base of the hill. Directly behind the church, halfway up Cedar Bluff, was this school. There was no road that went to it. You had to ride a horse or walk up there. There wasn't any roads that went to it. And the children would ride their horses to school, and then in that bluff back there was a Shelter Bluff cave, or Shelter Bluff stable that they used to keep the horses in, and they also kept coal in there for their wood burner in the school. Before Fern Cliff became a state park, it was a private park owned by Emma Redmond. Emma Redmond was a superintendent of schools for Johnson County. And this is Emma Redmond's house in Fern Cliff. It's not there any longer, but that's the house she lived in. And if you've ever have you ever been to the waterfall trail in Fern Cliff? You know, there's a parking area, and you walk to the right of the parking area, and that goes to the big waterfall. If you walk to the left, it goes to 2 smaller waterfalls. I think one's called Mohawk Falls, and the other one's Pocahontas Falls. But if you take that left trail, it's called the Redmond Trail. Well, that's because her house was back over there, up on the side of that hill. And if you go there today, this is the rock you walk around to get to those waterfalls. This is Hawks Cave at Fern Cliff. That's probably one of the biggest shelter bluffs in southern Illinois. And you can see the men right here. See the man compared to the bluff, and we don't even see the top of the bluff. All right, we were talking about Trigg Tower earlier. Out of all of the forest watchtowers that were built in southern Illinois, there's one outside of Simpson that still exists today. It's the only one remaining in the Shawnee National Forest, and you can go and visit and you can climb it today. It's 40 feet high, and it's called Trigg Tower. And when they built that tower in 1934, the Shawnee National Forest named it after Mr. Trigg in honor of all the promotional work that he did to get the forest in southern Illinois. And so this is the original Trigg Tower that was made out of wood. They replaced this one with a 100-foot tall steel tower, and then when they decided to abandon it, but they wanted to leave it as a for tourists to go in, they lowered it back down to 40 feet. So the tower that's there today is about the same height as this one, but it's a steel tower. And on the right-hand side is Cedar Falls, also known as Packentuck Falls, and this is the falls that this painting is of. And this is back when it was a Boy Scout camp, and the Boy Scouts used the pool at the bottom of the waterfall as their swimming hole. And that's the Boy Scouts swimming in the swimming hole at Camp Packentuck. The Kentucky Boy Scout camp had their camp there, and they called it Camp Packentuck after, Paducah and Packentuck. So this is Wall Street at Giant City on the upper left. And the lower right is Devil's Stand Table in Giant City Park. These are 2 sites in Giant City. This is the original marker down at Jonesboro for the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And the old man that's standing there was at the Lincoln-Douglas debates when he was a boy with his dad. This is from the 1930s. His last name was Sizemore. I think his name was William Sizemore, but his last name was Sizemore. And like I said, his dad, I think he was 7 or 8 years old when the Lincoln-Douglas debates took place, and he was actually there on site. And when the Trigg tour went there, he Mr. Trigg knew him and had him come and talk about what he remembered about the debate. Today, if you go to there's some really nice bronze statues of Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln at that debate site. The debate site's the old Union County Fairgrounds. And when the Shawnee National Forest came, they put one of their ranger stations there, and that's the ranger's house that you see in the background. And that ranger's house is still there today. On the lower right-hand side is Giant City Lodge being built. This is about 1834 or so, or 1934. And this is the Trigg tour sleeping on the back porch of the lodge. Today, the big banquet room that you eat in at the lodge is all back there, but that's the original back porch of Giant City Lodge. And you can see it under construction over there. The bathrooms are out of this door today. Kind of orient you to it. Or we might be looking at the back side of it, to tell you the truth.
The balcony is the backside of it.
I think you're right. This is the back side. All right, has anybody been to the scenic overlook at Alto Pass? All right, this is the scenic overlook at Alto Pass on the upper left. And at that time, what's now the Quintel Trail, there's a little hiking trail you can go down on the old rail bed. Well, at that time, in the 1930s when they were visiting, it was still an active railroad, and it was the highest grade that a railroad had to climb in southern Illinois, right there. And so people would come off that scenic overlook to watch the engines climb that grade, because the wheels would start spinning and there'd be sparks, and they'd really double down on that engine to make that climb. And so you can see the smoke coming up out of the locomotive in this picture right here. And then here it is coming up, getting a run at it to make it up that grade at Alto Pass. And you can, like I said, go visit it today. And on the right-hand side, these are pictures from the fire tower at Bald Knob. Before the cross was, Bald Knob Cross was built, there was a fire tower there. And the old road that you go up today to go visit the Bald Knob Cross was the road that used to go to the fire tower. And so that's the Trigg tour visiting that fire tower, and that's the view from up in the fire tower at Bald Knob Cross, or Bald Knob. Down in Union County, there was a couple of amateur archaeologists called the Thomas Brothers, and they were doing some archaeology at some Native American sites in some shelter bluffs. It's actually, the bluffs are west of Cobden, kind of out where the wineries are. Blue Sky Winery, just north of Blue Sky, is where the bluffs are. One's called Kerr Bluff, and the other one is called Garnet Bluff. And they're private property today. It's not Shawnee National Forest property. But the Thomas brothers were out there doing amateur digs for Native American artifacts, and you can see them showing off some of the things that they found. And that's the Thomas brothers themselves, and they were using archaeology methods just like they use today. That's a shaker screen with a screen wire in it, where you dig the dirt and you put it up there, and then you shake all the dirt loose, and then you look and pick through the rocks and the bone fragments and whatever remains, and see what kind of artifacts you find. But today, if you want to see the Thomas Brothers artifacts, they're on display in the Union County Museum, which is in Cobden, and they're open every weekend. They have a gift shop there, and you can see all the Thomas Brothers, the pottery. The only thing that's not on display anymore is they actually dug up some skeletons out there, and that's a no-no today. I don't know if it was back then, but you don't do that today, and you don't put them on display today. And so the skeletons are in the closet today and not on display. But all of the artifacts that the Thomas Brothers found when they were doing their digs are all on display down at Cobden, and you can go see them today. And one of the unique things about this, the Native Americans used shelter bluffs, and the Native Americans didn't build towns in southern Illinois. Southern Illinois was a place that they came seasonally with hunting, because they were following the animals, and the animals would come down into southern Illinois in when they came down into southern Illinois, the Native Americans would follow them, and they would pretty much make their homes in the shelter bluffs. And so this is a 2-story shelter bluff. I think this is Kerr Bluff. And they found artifacts on the upper story and the lower story, which was kind of a unique situation, because most of the time it's down underneath. But at this bluff, there was 2 different stories to the bluff, an upper story and a lower story. And that, again, that's the lower story down there where they were doing their digs. In 1948, they decided to promote, or let me back up a little bit. I probably have left off my story of the Shawnee National Forest. Last I told you, they had denied the Shawnee National Forest, or they denied Illinois' request for a national forest. That happened in 1931. Mr. Trigg and his group started promoting the area that same summer in 1931. They did it all summer 1932. In 1933, all of the petitions that he had had people sign over the last 2 years, they sent those petitions to Washington, D.C., and it said that the petitions were 2 feet high. A stack of petitions asking for a national forest in southern Illinois. Claude Parsons was our state representative from Golconda, and Claude Parsons was a friend of Trigg and had gone on the Ozark tours, and Claude Parsons had been working in Washington lobbying for the national forest as well. So when the resolutions and the petitions and Claude Parsons' work all came together in 1933, part of FDR's initial package when he became president was the New Deal, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. Well, the New Deal not only did it have CCC projects, WPA projects, the TVA, different things like that, it also authorized a bunch of national forests to be built. And they were called New Deal forests. And one of the New Deal forests became the Shawnee National Forest. What they did in 1933, they approved 3 different parcels. They called them purchase units. There was the Shawnee Purchase Unit, which was Hardin, Polk, Gallatin, and Sling County, those 4 counties on the east side. There was an Illini Purchase Unit, which was Jackson County and Union County on the west side. And then they also picked a site up in Madison County to have a national forest. Well, as things progressed, they realized that the site in Madison County probably wasn't worth going after, and they just dropped it. And they focused on the Illini Purchase Unit and the Shawnee Purchase Unit. So starting in the fall of 1933, remember Mr. Worthen that I showed you was the first man on the Shawnee National Forest? He came in the fall of 1933. I think he arrived in October. And he started optioning land, and they optioned and bought land from 1933, and then in 1939 there was enough land available to actually make the proclamation. And so by the time those 5 years passed, from 33 to 39, is that 5? 6. From those 6 years, by the time the 6 years passed, it had already been decided that why have 2 national forests in southern Illinois? Let's combine them into one. And so they dropped the Illini name from the Illini Purchase Unit, and it just became the Shawnee National Forest. There was a push to call it the Lincoln National Forest, but it never did. They stuck with the Shawnee name, and they made it the Shawnee National Forest in 1939. Well, Trigg continued his promotion work. And over the years, they started calling him Captain Trigg because he was leading the Army of the Ozarks, and that's what they started calling themselves each summer when they'd go on these camping trips in the forest. They'd say they're the Army of the Ozarks, and he was their captain. And they started calling him Captain Trigg. Well, in 1948, they decided that Captain Trigg deserved a promotion, and so this was a gathering of all the men that had been on the Ozark tours over the years. And they were presenting him with a briefcase down here in the lower right-hand corner. And then in the upper corner up here, they are reading a proclamation where he is being promoted from captain to colonel of the Illinois Ozarks. And so it's kind of like an honorary Kentucky colonel, you know, like Colonel Sanders. Well, he was a colonel of the Army of the Ozarks. And so from then, 1948, till he died the following year, everybody always referred to him as Colonel Trigg. And even today, you'll see a lot of things when it's written about him, they'll be calling him Colonel Trigg. He was never in the armed forces. He didn't earn it in the armed forces. This is where he got that honorary title. And this is at Fern Cliff in Herrin. If you've ever been, or Ferry Cliff, sorry, Ferry Cliff at Herrin. If you ever drive from Harrisburg down to Garden of the Gods on Route 34 and you go through Herrin, and over on the right side you'll see a little cave and a bluff right there. That's where Ferry Cliff was. And it was the Ferry Cliff Cafe, and that's the cafe in the background. And the cave that's on the side of the road would be about right in here, in this picture. And you can see the remains of the restaurant today. You know why the foundation's still there? Because all of this is on state right-of-way today, but it's grandfathered in. And if they take the foundation out, then nobody can ever do anything there. But as long as the foundation's there, somebody could come and rebuild that and do something there. And so when the building burned a few years ago, they left the foundation, so if anybody ever wanted to build something there, that they could. But it is on state right-of-way. It's right off of the highway. Mr. Trigg died in 1949, and when he died, the 1950 Ozark tour was going to start in Grand Tower and go to Battery Rock, Grand Tower on the Mississippi River, and was going to go to Battery Rock in Hardin County on the Ohio River, and he was calling it the River to River Ozark Trail, or River to River Ozark Tour. And the plan was to create a highway from Grand Tower to Battery Rock that would go through all of these sites: Garden of the Gods, Pounds Hollow, Rim Rock, Fern Cliff, Bellsmith Springs, of course, Tower Rock at the riverfront in Grand Tower, Giant City Park, all of these sites across southern Illinois. The plan was to create a highway that would join all of these sites to where you could go start on one end of the state or the other and go down a hard road, a highway, and be able to visit all of these places. And to commemorate this, they were going to call it the Trigg Memorial Highway. He died in 1949, just as these plans were beginning to be made. And in 1955, when the Ozark Tour started in 1955 to do their annual summer tour, they stopped in Ozark, and right off of the highway on Route 45 in Ozark, they did this memorial plaque, because the plans were still underway to do this highway. And the plaque says Trigg Memorial Ozark Trail. And that's what they were promoting as the name of this, again, to honor Colonel Trigg and all the work that he had done promoting Southern Illinois. The highway never came to be. Over the years, it was called the George Rogers Clark Trail. They were going to name it that. They thought they could get more national publicity naming it after somebody like George Rogers Clark instead of a local hero. The highway just got abandoned. The Boy Scouts picked up the idea, and they made a special merit badge, and they created a trail from Grand Tower to Battery Rock. And you would drive part of the trail, and there were certain sites that you had to camp at and to visit and walk the trails. And if you did so many of these, you earned a special merit badge. And that was called the Shawnee Ozark Trail. And that was done. And the last person to mark that trail was Mike Bost as his Eagle Scout project. Was the last time that trail was designated. And then in the 1980s and 90s, they started getting the idea of, well, let's create a hiking trail that would cross southern Illinois, river to river, going from the Ohio to the Mississippi River. And they used the original beginning and end points of Trigg's idea of a memorial, or this highway, Battery Rock in the east in Hardin County, and Grand Tower on the west. And so in 1990-ish, the River to River Trail was designated, and it's a hiking and equestrian trail. And the original River to River Trail used those as the terminal points, the east and west terminal point. Later on, they decided that Battery Rock wasn't the best place to start the trail because it was remote and it's really hard to get to. And so now the east terminus is in Elizabethtown, and it starts at the riverfront in Elizabethtown. And it still goes to the riverfront in Grand Tower on the west. But the original idea was Trigg's idea, and this plaque still exists today. If you're driving up Route 45 from Vienna to Harrisburg, as you get close to Ozark, there's an Ozark General Store on the left as you're going north on 45. Well, right before you get to the general store, there's a lady that lives up on a little hill on the right-hand side in a trailer, and this rock and memorial stone are in her front yard right off the highway. You can see it there today, and she plants flowers around it and takes care of it. All right, and that's me on Stoneface. All right, I tried to cover all the ground I wanted to cover. Does anybody have any questions? Something I might have missed? Yes, ma'am.
You didn't miss it. I was just curious about all the men fishing off the dam. They were shoulder to shoulder. How did they keep their lines from getting all tangled up?
That's a good question. You know what? They were charged too for that boat ride out there. I have seen the receipt. I've held the receipt in my hand of where they paid to have a guy take them out in a John boat, and he also provided them all the bait for them to go out on the dam. But again, can you imagine something like that happening today? The Army Corps of Engineers would die. Yes, ma'am.
Two things. The fluorspar mines that you mentioned, was that in Rosy Clare?
No, actually, you know where, are you familiar with Hardin County?
Yeah.
Do you know where Hasty Quarry is?
No.
All right, Hasty Quarry is between Elizabethtown and Cave and Rock on Route 146 and on the north side of the road. And that Hasty Quarry is on the same side as that fluorspar mine. As a matter of fact, Hasty's, they quarry aggregate rock today, but every once in a while they'll still come across a pocket of fluorspar when they're mining their rock, and they also do fluorspar out of the hill too.
Isn't there a fluorspar museum or something in Rosy Clare?
It's in Rosy Clare. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of two questions. One about the forest itself. Since all the trees have been taken and had gone, did it just kind of regrow back on its own, or did they, like these ladies came along with the pine trees, there were several different things that put it back, or, to reforest, good word, thank you.
Yeah, there was a concerted effort to reforest Southern Illinois. They had two nurseries. One was down at Anna, and the other one was at Junction in Gallatin County. And the first thing they did is they went out and collected any seedlings that they could to use to propagate. And the reason they used pine, see, there's only two places in Southern Illinois that have natural pine trees. One is the Pine Hills down in Union County, and then one's Piney Creek Ravine, which is north of Murfreesboro, between Murfreesboro and Chester. That's the only two places that pine trees naturally occur in Southern Illinois. But today, we've got pine trees all over the place, and those pine trees were all planted as part of the Shawnee National Forest. But they planted the pine because A, they grew fast, B, they could collect all the pine cones and use them for seedlings. They were easy to get seedlings off of. And C, the pine needles actually help replenish the soil and bring the soil back. And so that's why most of the woods that were planted, or the trees that were planted, were pines and black locust. And the reason the black locusts were planted was because they could use them for fence posts and things of that nature, and they thought, let's plant some useful trees. And of course the pine, is used in framing and building, and has been for years. So the reason why the forest was replanted too was to bring back a forest industry to Southern Illinois and to get it away from agriculture, because all these hills should never have been cut down of trees and let the dirt leave. And so the original idea was that the Shawnee National Forest would be a forest of recreational sites like Bellsmith Springs and Garden of the Gods and Little Grand Canyon over on the west side, and that there would be a forestry program where they were planting trees, cutting trees down, and they already had the nurseries going to replenish the trees and have an active forestry program in Southern Illinois as well. Yes, sir.
And now their thinking right now is they're going to try to move away from the pines and put it back to the oaks and the naturals.
All of these trees that were planted in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, well, they were still planting trees in the 70s too, but most of the trees were planted back in the 30s and 40s. Well, a lot of these trees are reaching their end of life, and so now the thinking is, let's bring back the hickory and the oaks and the hardwoods that were here to begin with, Because if they let it naturally go, what's coming back are maple trees. And the maple trees are fast growing, and the maple trees choke out your hickories and the oak trees. And the hickory and the oak trees are what the wildlife eat on, not the maple trees. And so they're really wanting to replant hickory and oak trees in these forests. So there is a push. There's not like a big push for it right now, but the talk from the Shawnee National Forest is let's start bringing back the hickory and oak tree forests that were here to begin with. They were native here. Yes, go ahead.
Cave in rock, having gone to the back of it, and where there's light comes through and then that's some water sometimes, do they know if that was there forever or that's just erosion from years? You know what I mean, like,
The
I guess
earliest,
way back when was
the
there
earliest,
light in the
the
back?
earliest anybody was going to the cave back in the late 1700s, that crack in the top of the cave was there. But what happened when all that silt was back there, you could actually climb out of the cave back there. There was actually a front and the back entrance to the cave. Now, what they don't believe, at one time they thought the cave was formed from water going into that crack area and then washing out and erosion over the years. But there's just not enough water that would come from on top to do all that. So the thinking is that it was all eroded by a stream that used to come, an underground stream, that used to be the exit for that underground stream that just doesn't exist anymore.
You mentioned short grave, is that Grindstaff Hollow? Can you have access to the back part of that now?
Can you have, well, eventually you come to private property. There's a lake back there where they dammed up the creek and made a lake. That's all private property. But yeah, you can go to Grindstaff Hollow today. I've been several times.
Okay, describe this like a little giant city. It's got a lot of geographical.
Yep. And there's some neat stories about it too, like the Short Grave and Preston Bluff. And I hate to be this way, but you can read the book.
You mentioned Little Grand Canyon, I don't think I've heard of that.
It's south of Murfreesboro.
Oh, is it?
Mhm. It's a Shawnee National Forest site, south of, it's on Route 127, I think. It's off of 127.
It's off of the May 8th storm, pretty much, for a lot of.
It's one of those places that you don't want to go when it's wet and slippery.
That's right.
Farm is huge.
Yeah, and it's snaky too.
It's snaky.
Yeah,
And it's easy to get lost.
I think it's one of the more remote places.
It's a long.
There's some beautiful sites that in the Shawnee National Forest. Somebody else?
Todd, I've actually seen one of those Native American skeletons that they had to hide away. It was stored under the man's bed, and he would go and get it out for you.
Mercy.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly my favorite Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the grandsons of the Thomas brothers helps operate the Union County Museum today. So if you go there, not only can you see their stuff, but one of their grandsons is helping to run the place.
Are you familiar with Sand Cave on 140? Is it still, can you get to it?
Sand Cave on
You go off of 148, like you gotta go to the Marion Penitentiary.
no, I am not familiar with that, but there is a sand cave over by Bellsmith
Right, but
Springs.
it's also mentioned, shows in the book, it's right, and the road is marked as Sand Cave, but it's all there's private property everywhere.
Which one?
Okay, like if you go out of town on 148, you get up, like there's that little store there,
Right.
Double Kitchens one way, Penitentiary the other way. You go down the hill there, and there's Sand Cave Road.
I'm not familiar with that one, no.
It's mentioned in the book, but I've been trying to find it.
There's a sand cave south of Fern Cliff, but the sand cave that is like sand cave is the largest sandstone cave in America, they say. And it is over by Bellsmith Springs. It looks a lot like Cave Rock. It's a big open cavern like Cave Rock is. And it's really easy to get to if you know where it's at. It's on Cedar Grove Church Road, and it's not too far from Cedar Grove Church, thank you. And there's Sand Cave Road, just like here. If you take Sand Cave Road and it comes to a big curve, there's a little parking area right there and a trailhead. You park right there and just follow the trailhead around the bluff, and you come right to Sand Cave. Easy to get to. And it's one of those trails. It's a hiking trail that just about anybody, you could do it with a cane if you had to use a cane to walk. There's no steep climbs, there's no steep drops, and it goes right to that cave.
Todd,
Yes,
One
ma'am.
more question. The movie How the West Was Won was a big deal when I was a teenager. Is that, it's my understanding that was actually filmed in Cave and Rock?
Nope, not quite.
No? Okay.
It was filmed at Battery Rock, the eastern terminus of the river-to-river trail I was talking about.
Uh-huh.
But they made a fake cave. When Jimmy Stewart is climbing up the riverbank and going to the cave, all that was a set. For some reason, this was made in the 60s,
Right.
and they did not use the actual cave at Cave and Rock when they made that movie. But in the 1950s, when Walt Disney made Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, that movie, well, that was made in the 50s, and they actually used the cave at Cave and Rock in that movie. So Fess Parker and Buddy Ebsen, and they fought the Hart brothers at the cave at Cave and Rock, and it was the actual cave. That was done in the mid-1950s. But How the West Was Won tells the story of the river pirates and all that, and actually they say that the river pirate in that movie is kind of like based off Sam Mason, the old Sam Mason, the river pirate, and is a pretty accurate portrayal of how the river pirates operated.
The little restaurant up there has some pictures of the movie.
Yep.
And you're familiar with that,
Yep.
you shared.
Yep. Yep. If you go to the Cave and Rock Park restaurant, they have pictures of those.
Now,
I
how
don't
much
know if you can see it or not. My phone is ringing, and I wondered if it was blowing. My pants were blowing down here.
How long is the tour now?
Oh, yeah, I was going to tell everybody, we brought the Ozark tours back in 2013, and our next Ozark tour is April the 13th, and we're going to visit 3 of the 11 stone forts in southern Illinois. There's 11 stone forts, stone walls actually, across southern Illinois. There is rumor that they think they might have found a 12th one, but there's 11 known right now. The furthest one east is at Rimrock Trail, and the one furthest west is in Giant City State Park, and then there's 9 others between. So we're going to go visit 3 of these on the Ozark tour, and we're going to go to Millstone Bluff, and Dr. Mark Wagner is going to be there, your speaker that you're trying to arrange to come talk about Indian rock art, because Millstone Bluff has a lot of Indian rock art at it, and he's going to come and talk about that. So it's $40. There's some light hiking, not too strenuous, but there will be some light hiking. And we're also going to visit an Indian kettle site by Stone Fort, where the Native Americans would carve down into a rock and make like a kettle in it, and then fill it with water and put hot stones in there, and they would steep meat in these stone kettles. And they could also use them to, grind in too. But we're going to visit one of those that's in a rock bluff over there by Stone Fort. So anyway, that's the next one, and there's a few flyers here if anybody wants to go. And that's my phone number and email. The email goes to me, so if you want to do that, just use the first phone number, text me or call me, or email me there at info@illinoisozarks.com, and we'll get you put on the list if you decide you want to go. We leave from the Shawnee National Forest headquarters in Harrisburg. We want to leave by 8:30 on that date, on April 13th. It's a Saturday, yeah. And we do 2 of these a year. The one in the spring is usually more hiking involved. The one in the fall is usually more historical based and history based. So we go to some historical sites in southern Illinois. So I guess I should do a commercial real quick. The photos that we saw were curated by Charles Hammond, a photographer that lives over in El Dorado. And I got access to these photos when I started helping with bringing back the Ozark tours. And then Arcadia Publishing does these books, and I know you've seen them. They've got them for all kinds of things. It's a series called Images of America. Well, as the Historical Society president in Hardin County, I got an email from them wanting to do a book on the Rose Hotel. And I was familiar with their books because my wife and I own several of these. And I said, well, I don't know about a Rose Hotel book, but I have access to these photos and a story of how the Shawnee National Forest came to be that I think would be a great book. And so they agreed, and so we put a book together, and there's 218 photos in here, and 80 to 90% of them are all from the 30s and 40s, telling the story of the men on these Ozark tours. And all of the photos have captions telling you what you're seeing, and if there's an anecdote about the site, it's there too. So if you like the book, I've got them here. They're $22. That's what the cover price is, and we'd be glad to sell you one. You can also get it, your library here will have one, so you can check it out, I suppose. And you can also buy them at Barnes & Noble in Carbondale, but if you buy it from me, I get more money off of it than if you buy it over there. And also, I had another book coming out in May. The same company, after we got this book done, an editor called me and said, I've been wanting to get a book done on the river pirates of Cave and Rock, and would you be interested in putting that book together? And so I said, yes, I would. And so it's coming out under the History Press in May, and it's called Cave and Rock, River Pirates and Frontier Outlaws, and it covers all the ne'er-do-wells of Hardin County and Kentucky on either side of the Ohio River from 1795 to just after the Civil War. So there's about 7 or 8 chapters on different outlaws that infested the area back then. So thanks for having me. I was glad to come and have this talk. And if you have any questions, feel free to come up and see me. Come up and look at the promotional material if you want to. That's in the shadow box over there. And then, of course, if you want a book, just see me or my wife. Thank you.